Hello, YouTube. Welcome. I want to share with you a discovery I made when I was 28 years old. And that discovery has benefited me tremendously. I want to share that with you. You probably have not heard this ever before. So that's great. And maybe you can find some use for this discovery that I made. When I was 2, 3, 4 years old, I recognized that I had a gift, a unique gift that was very strong. And that gift was the discernment of patterns. I was able to see patterns everywhere. Now, I saw patterns in the weather. I was able to, even though I was only 4 or 5 years old, I was able to determine what weather is going to be based on what it was the previous few years. I knew when all the trees would bud. I knew what day, almost to the day, what certain birds would come back. I studied nature very seriously as a young child. I also started to see patterns in human behavior, human thought, how people pattern their own lives. And it was very distinct. It wasn't vague to me, right? And when I became 28 years old, at the age of 28, still knowing these patterns and still discovering patterns year after year after year after year up until the age of 28, I decided to look back at my life and see if I can discern a grand pattern, like a bigger pattern, so that if I look back in the past and see the patterns in the past, that would give me a leg up or a better way of understanding but the possibilities of the future, right? So I looked back and I thought about the various milestones in my life. What age was I? And I discovered that my age, 7, 14, 21, those were very distinct in the ebb and flow within those periods of time. And I decided, hey, I want to verify this and make sure that I'm correct. So I started to mentally take notes as, okay, what about the next 7 years? And what about the 7 years after that? And the 7 years after that? And I've been doing that ever since then, ever since I was 28. I'm 57 years old now. And I think that I've reached a solid conclusion that the human life cycle has cycles within it of 7-year increments. And within these 7 years, there's an ebb and a flow. I wanted to understand what that ebb and that flow was so that I can anticipate the next 7 years. And that's what I've been doing ever since I was 28 years old. And all of that was started when I started to look back and I understood that my life had certain patterns, incremental patterns in it. I wanted to share that with you today. Let's go to a chart that I made to illustrate what I mean. All right. These are the physiological 7-year cycles for females and for males. Excuse my rough graphics. I just put this together because I wanted to visualize it. I wanted you to have some visuals would explain it better than just mere words. All right. So I'm going to go through each one of these parts. From the ages of 0 to 4 to the far left, males and boys and girls are very much similar. I mean, a 3-year-old, a toddler male and a toddler female, they're very similar. But at about the halfway mark, about 4 years old, some distinctions start to occur. Girls, they start to look more like a girl, actually. Instead of a toddler or baby, they start to look more like a little girl. And a boy kind of starts to thicken up a little bit, and it gets a little bit more rigid and harder physique wise. And that's when the distinction starts to occur, around about the age of 4. And then at the age of 7, for myself, and looking back and based on information that I've gathered since making this discovery to verify my belief, it is understood that the age of 7 is when a young child starts to become a self, an independent self. They become more socially aware. And for girls, for females, for young girls start to, once they become more identify themselves as a unique individual, they start to calibrate themselves in the society and see, they become very socially aware. For boys, there's also a sense of independence and a sense of, I am an independent being. I'm an independent person. I am myself. But one thing I noticed that I even noticed it when I was a child, that boys, with other boys, want to determine their social rank. What's the top alpha boy? What's the number 2? What's number 3, and so forth. Originally, when I first moved to the projects from just outside of the city limits, I came in there and I recognized immediately that I was ranked at the bottom. Here I am, this chubby kid, this new guy, this chubby kid with no big brothers. So of course, that's where I'm going to be. And I recognize that immediately. I have no protection. I have no father. I have nobody to protect me from these guys. So I'm going to rank at the bottom. Now, I didn't let them treat me that way, but I recognized the situation. And I had to fight my way from the bottom to rise up in the rank. I had to learn social skills, how to communicate, how to read the room, how to read these guys, and determine, okay, how can I rise up the ranks? It wasn't like it was just a completely conscious effort. It was just that this had to be done, So from the age of 7 to the age of 11, there's growth. There's a transition see these white lines that I have for the females and the males? The white line, the lower parts of the white line, means that that's a transition. And the higher heel, the hump part, that is the peak of that cycle. That is at the peak of that cycle. So if you are a female or a male, when you are 4 years old, you are at the peak of your first cycle. When it's not like a rigid number. It's just a small frame of time where you're at the peak of your first cycle, your first 7 years, before you even reach 7. During those 4 years, when you first start from infancy, you are learning a lot. You're learning. You're growing. You're seeing yourself in a reality that's different from being in the mother's womb. This is a whole new reality. Everything looks fresh to you, and you're you're learning to speak. You're learning to recognize faces, and you're learning a lot of things. So by the time you're 4 years old, that peaks when you're 4 years old, around about that range. Now, this is not locked into stone. Each individual may vary slightly a little bit, but it's pretty templated. It's pretty structured that every human being has these peaks and valleys. And after 4, between 4 and 7, all the things that you learn from infancy, from birth to 4, you've used them, and now they've reached their dead end of utility. And now there's a slight transition, a downward transition. That does not mean depressed, or doesn't mean that you have bad luck or things just don't work out for you. It just means that physiologically you're going through a transitional phase where you've maxed out on the first 7 years, peaking at age 4. You've maxed those out. Now by the time you become 7, it's time for a new cycle. And then you start to, the physiological changes in you require for it to become a new cycle now, for you to learn new things. And from 7 to 11, that's a whole transitional phase of acquiring new knowledge and new skills and new abilities. Between ages and ancient societies have always known this. Even our current society knows this as well. But this is not something that they speak on too much. It just gets built into the structure of how we socialize and administer the lives of young people. Right. So between 11 and 14, things such as, that's when, for females, bat mitzvah and sweet 16, those types of things start to occur. Manhood for boys, bar mitzvah for the Jewish people, and all across the world there were manhood rituals to start to say, hey, your childhood is over. Now you're starting to become a man now. And they have these rituals, these psychological rituals that punctuate these physiological changes that are occurring in boys and girls, young adults at the time. From the age of 14 to 18, at 14, you're beginning a new cycle, a new 7-year cycle. So you're starting not fresh, but all the information that you've learned prior, you still have. But now there's an upswing in gathering new information, new sexual information for both boys and girls, new social information. Your physical body starts to change more rapidly during this phase. Females are in their cycle right now. Boys, they start to mature sexually. They start to grow facial hair and beards, and the muscles start to thicken out a little bit. They have growth spurts, right? Those are the physical evidence of the transition. And by the time you are 18 years old, from 14 to 18, you've acquired the physiological, your body, nature, the nature has equipped us that in this cycle, you will learn everything from the age of 14 to 18 to benefit that new spurt of growth. Not just physical, but physiological, not just physiological, but mentally as well. Everything starts to change. You start to get farther and farther away from when you were 4 and 11. Now you're 18 years old, But then and that's the peak of the 7-year cycle between the ages of 14 and 21. And of course, at 18, that is known as you become in society. It is structured. These milestones are built into society to commemorate that. So when you're 18, you are an independent person now. You're no longer a child. That is the break from childhood when you reach that climax in the cycle at age 18. Of course, a lot of other things happen. They've even built the school system around these cycles as well. From elementary school to middle and high school, That's what these cycles are built to. That's what those educational structures are built around, actually. So when you're 18, you've reached the peak of that 7-year cycle between the ages of 14 and 21. And of course, when you reach 21, you are a legal adult, you're fully independent, and you're at your height of sexuality, both males and females. But it's the beginning of a new cycle. So you're going to have an upswing of learning new things now. And I'm not talking about just societal things like jobs in college or anything like that. That's part of it, actually. But physiologically, you take a massive, another 3.5 year leap forward. So by the time you're 25, you're at the height of that cycle between the ages of 21 and 28. And this pattern continues from 21 to 28. Between 28 and 30, there is a heightened sense of awareness at age 32, and between the ages of 35 and 42. At the age of 39, that's the height of awareness and growth within that 7 years period of time. Now, of course, the physiological aspects start to change by the time you reach 42. Hormonal for men, hormonal changes, hormonal declines start to occur. Testosterone starts to take a precipitous drop, but men are still fertile, right? And I thought about that, and it's like when you contrast that with the female cycle, when the female is from peak fertility at age 21, her fertility continues until the age of around about 32. 30 and 30s, early 30s to 32. 32 is for a female. That's the 32 for females and males. That's the height of the pinnacle of the cycle between the ages of 28 and 35. But for the female, that reproductive cycle starts to decline. Her fertility, female fertility starts to decline. And there's a physiological, when that occurs in females, there's a physiological increase in the desire for sexuality because her body wants her to attempt to have one more child before her fertility window closes. And all of that starts to occur around about the age of 28 to 30, 32, between age 28 and 32. At 28, it's at a lower or sense of awareness is not the right word, power or ability, because the previous cycle is worn out. All the acquired physiological knowledge and mental knowledge has reached its limit. So now it starts to pick back up again at the age of 21 to the age of 32, which is the height of that cycle between the age of 28 and 35. And the same with males, same with females, except there's a sexual component to it that makes it slightly different for males and females. For females, between that, the cycle from 28 to 35, that's when the sexuality heightens up to try to squeeze one more child out before her fertility, because her fertility is starting to decrease. Her body instinctively wants to try to reproduce one more child. So between the ages of 28 and 35, even 42, those 14-year cycle, women's sexuality gets heightened, whereas men's sexuality tends to just gradually starts to taper off more by the time they're like 42 years old. The hormonal declines, but their hormones decline, but they're still fertile. And I thought about that. Is that what would be the nature's reason why? It's because men are defenders. Men still have to have the same testosterone, the same hormones that make us want to reproduce is the same hormones that gives us strength and ability to fight and defend ourselves and our tribe. Okay, so let's look at the cycle between 49 for men. Let's look at the cycle between the 7 years between 49 and 56. There's a hormonal transition that occurs in men where the testosterone starts to decline more rapidly around about that period of time, because nature dictates that although you can have children, maybe you shouldn't be competing against the 21 and 28 year olds, right? because physically in ancient times, or in previous ages, in previous times, the 49-year-old going up against the 21-year-old may not work out so well. So nature is built into us to recognize those types of things. For a woman at the age between the ages of 42 and 49, her fertility ends. So for a woman, her fertility ends, and for a man, his hormones start to decline in that cycle, right? But keep in mind, just because those things are occurring, that does not mean it's negating from what's going on. At the age of 46, for men and women, there is a heightened sense of understanding, heightened sense of awareness for that. That is the peak of that. That is the peak of growth within that 7-year span. And of course, we know that a lot of times at the age of about 46, that's when men are starting to reach their economic power. For women come into themselves, although they may not be having children, they start to come in themselves in another regard, right? And also they are learning a tremendous amount of social wisdom, social skills, a social calibration, which started back when they were very young at 4 years old. And the same with men. It just changes because sexuality is being removed from the scene. Now things become a little bit more abstract from the age of 49 onward. From the age of 49 onward, when women are in that menopausal transition and on into the post-fertility ages, on to retirement ages, they are transitioning to the age of more abstract wisdom, because their physiology starts to diminish as we get older, right? It's same for the men. There's a hormonal transition. We're not out chasing tail and fighting as much as we used to. So our transition starts to go as well until we too hit retirement age. But still, from the ages of 56 to the ages of 63, that 7-year cycle, we still have a peak in our understanding and our peak of physiological awareness of reality at that point, at the age of 60, for men and women. For men and women. And at 63, which is built into our society, we call that, of course, starting at 62, 63, we call that retirement age. That's when we can retire. And so, in other words, and at that point, it starts another 7-year cycle from 63 to age 70. And at age 67, which is also full retirement, because like I said, these cycles are built into our societies, not just American society, but it's built into universal global societies. People all around the world at all times have known about these cycles, right? So at age 67, the age of full retirement, that is when you're at another peak within that 7-year cycle between the ages of 63 and 70. Broken down a little bit further than that, this is the physiological cycle. But I want to share with you how you can use this, how you can utilize this for your benefit, because I think that's part of the reason why the ancients understood this cycle, so that they can discern, how they can utilize it much more better, not just to know it. Let's go to this chart here. Excuse my graphics. I just whipped this together. Understanding the 7-year cycles. All right. So within this 7 years, look at I did 2 examples. Look at the top example from 14 to 42. At the age of 14, now this is a fictional timeline. This is a fictional cycle. I just wanted to illustrate what I mean, how it can vary between individuals. Now, starting from 14, you see that that's the beginning of a new cycle between 14 and 21. At the age of 18, that person has reached the height of that cycle. Everything they've learned between the ages of 14 and 18, that new growth spurt of knowledge, wisdom, whatever, that's the peak of it at age 18. Now, this is built into us. It's not a conscious choice. But let's suppose this individual does something to damage himself, like you get a felony or become very unhealthy, or just something that throws off his physiological natural the natural course of his physiological and mental and spiritual understanding. Well, then he might take a dip past that red baseline. And feel, well, not only is he not at a normal state, he's below optimal in his mind, and he could be in his health as well. But if he holds on and understands how things work, how this pattern works, how these 7-year cycles work, he should understand that by the age of 25, things should, as he leaves from 21 to 25, things should start to get better for him. Not just physically, but psychologically, things start to get better, because at age 25, he's at the height of that physiological and mental cycle of the 7 years from age 21 to 28. And then when he's 28, let's suppose he gets his health right, he gets better, he gets out of jail, or he gets wiser. Let's try that. And he decides to grow, even become a better person, right? He utilizes, a person can utilize these cycles, as this example has done, between the ages of 28. I'm looking at the top graph. Between the ages of 28 and 35. At the age of 32, that which is going to be the height of that cycle, if the person puts in the maximum effort of growth, they can expand far upward beyond the height of the previous cycles. And that is what we call growth. That is what understanding these cycles, how it can benefit you. And when that cycle starts to decline, if you've tapped out that cycle, that 7-year cycle between the ages of 28 and 35, you've tapped it out. It had reached its climax. All the technological and mental capacity that you've acquired between the ages of 28 to 32 now starts to kind of like become stale or not as useful, because there is a need for continual change. You start to, in a sense, it's not recognized as decline. It's just not as upwardly mobile and less aware than it was at age 32. So by the age of 35, there's time at the beginning of a new cycle. And in this new cycle, between the ages of 35 and 39, that's a period of growth to learn new things. And this happens to you whether you want to or not. This is happening in the background. I'm only suggesting that you bring it to the foreground and recognize, hey, by the time I'm 32, 18, 25, 32, and 39, I'm going to use these periods of time to actually push the envelope and grow tremendously. And during those times where, like the age of 14, 21, 28, 35, and 42, where things may not be working out for me like I thought, physiologically, or psychologically, I'm kind of like stuck and confused. I'm not sure what to do. By recognizing these patterns, you'll know that that's all part of it. What goes up will come down, and vice versa. You know, it's no similar than winter comes, and then spring and summer, and then fall, and then winter comes right back around, and so does spring and summer and fall. It's the same exact pattern, except these are the 7-year cycles that are built within us. Right? So look at the bottom graph. This is one I did of myself, and from the age I started from age 42. Right? I just start from that period of time. Right? At age 42, I was physically ill. confused, not and wondering what the hell is going to be going on with my life in the future. But me recognizing these patterns, I knew that by the age of 46, that's going to be I knew that 42 was the beginning, was the start of a new 7-year cycle. So I thought that I would take advantage of that. And so from 42 to 46, I lost 100 pounds. Actually, to be perfectly honest, I lost 145 pounds in that period, because that was a period of growth that I recognized. And I said, okay, let me ride this wave to improve myself. Fully expecting that after 46, between 46 and 49, that there may be a lull and a lull of power, a lull of strength, a somewhat rising level of confusion, because at 29 I'm at the bottom of the end of one cycle, and 49 I'm at the end of one cycle that started at 42, and I'm at the beginning of another cycle, 7-year cycle. And I knew that I would have to wait another few years until I was 53 to have the height of that new cycle. Okay, another thing happened that when I was at age 49, I had a divorce. I started a divorce. I also lost my job. I got laid off. So I was laid off without a job at the beginning of a new cycle. But I wasn't afraid, because I knew this. I understand that a human life has cycles of 7 years. And so that I knew that I was 49 and I'm at the bottom of a certain cycle. And I thought about that. Let me pause for a minute. I thought about that, and I said, is it the fact that I believe in these cycles cause of this decrease? Oh, I'm 40. Did I say to myself, I'm 49, so I'm at the low part of a cycle? No, that's not part of it. No. I recognize that this was occurring for a lot of people. Everybody. It's not just me. Because there are hormonal changes and physiological. That's why I want to emphasize the physiological aspect. This is the nature aspect of it. Nobody's consistently the same. This is just a continuation from birth and to all the way through puberty to 18 years old. It's just that they are more obvious because they're more physical. We can watch a person grow and see how they change and see how their body changes. But when you're a full adult, those changes are not so obvious. But internally, they're still there. You're still changing internally, right? So back to 49, I knew that by the age of 53 that was going to be the height of this new 7-year cycle. So I went through that. I was very positive, very optimistic. And I fought through it, increased my skills, gained new skills, and got a new job, right? In that period. All right. So by the time I hit 56, which was during the COVID years, there was another layoff. But as you see, that dip, that physiological and that psychological dip that could have occurred didn't occur, because I'm a much more mature man now, and I recognize just go with the flow. Just go with the flow, and everything will be okay, and everything will be all right. I was not worried at all. It was understanding this wisdom, this ancient wisdom, will give you peace of mind, where by not understanding it, there will be less of it. There will be some frustration, and there will be some concern and worry. By understanding this, that really does eliminate a large part of your worries. A large part of your worries. Right. So if you look at, I'm 57 now. That's where I am right now. And I recognize that I'm on a new upward swing, an upward trajectory, that I will reach the climax of this 7-year cycle at the age of 60. That's where I'm starting to make these new videos now. That's where I'm starting to do a lot of things that I'm starting to do those new things, because I recognize this is the best time to do it. This is the best time to acquire new skills. while my physiological mind is renewed for the fresh start until it reaches the age of 60. And at the age of 60, that's the climax of all the technological understanding of nature and myself, the reasoning, the logic, the rationale should reach its height by the time I'm 60. And by the time I'm 63, that old information becomes stale and needs to be refreshed again. And we just start the cycle all over again from age 63 to 67. And then it takes needs renewing again at the age of 70, and it reaches its heights again at age 74, and so forth. Right? All right. So I broke the cycle down. If you look to the right, I broke the cycle down. What's actually occurring a little bit better. All right. So number one, that's the first year in the cycle. Number two, that's the height of that's the height of physiological awareness and I say spiritual awareness, but even if you're not a spiritual person, you can call it environmental awareness. It's just your physiology ties in with the actual world. That's pretty much what it boils down to. And number three, that is the end of that cycle. All the information that you've learned has peaked in number two. So now it starts to get stale or a little bit there's a need of renewal by the time it reaches stage three. So if you look at the lower right, I kind of broke that down a little bit further. In the lower right, it says in stage one, you reset. In the stage one of the 7-year cycle, there's a reset. You start to gather new information. The confusion of the end of the last previous cycle starts to decrease. And there's a distillation of previous cycles. So that means all the stuff that you've learned in your previous cycles from birth to 7, 14, 21, on and on and on and on, they have accumulated, right? But there's only so far they can go, right? So that's why number one is at a lower state. If I can use that, I'll use that word for right now. It is at a lower state or a brand new state, so to speak. In stage two, you're a mid-cycle. This is the high point of the 7 years. You start to implement those new things you learned from stage one. Between stage one and stage two, you start to implement those things, that new information. You start to do those things. Things become more clearer. Your awareness becomes sharper. Your situational awareness becomes sharper. You start to understand how you, as a physical biological animal, fit into the natural scheme of things at the height of number two. And also your productivity increases. There's a marked increase in productivity. All right. So after the peak at number two, things start to change again because this cycle is reaching the end point. Right. So at stage three, the cycle ends and it starts to, I won't say low, but I use low because that's the easiest way I can describe it to you. It's just that cycle has petered out. It's starting to peter out. It started to kind of get stale, in other words. Your awareness starts to decrease at the end in this cycle. Your creativity, your ingenuity starts to kind of like wane a little bit because you're physiologically confused. Because you've reached the end of a cycle. It's the same confusion that a 12, or 11, or 12-year-old person feels when they don't know. It's like, I'm changing, my voice is changing. Their voice is starting to crack and everything. They go from one child voice to a new voice. Things start to change, right? At the end of the childhood, and then it changes into something else. And so it's in stage three, there's a level of growing confusion. You may not feel confused, like literally confused, but physiologically, there is some level of confusion because this new information of cycle one has been assimilated in cycle two. Now what? And because as a biological being, our bodies are not the only thing that needs to eat. Our minds and our mentality, our psychology needs to keep evolving as well. So that's why these cycles That's what this cycle illustrates. That's what this graph illustrates in the cycle, right? And then there's also in phase 3, which is very similar to stage 1. Stage 1, of course, being the beginning of the cycle. Stage 3 being the end of the cycle. There is somewhat of a low productivity. Your productivity, your creativity, it kind of wanes a little bit because there is some confusion, right? And of course, this cycle repeats itself in the next 7 years. Not only do we cycle physiologically, what is at the root of that physiological change? What causes that? And let me tell you why that occurs. Not only are our bodies going through physiological changes, I mean, from hormonal to growth to all types of changes that occur from 0 to 7, 7 to 14, 21, 28, so forth. And then those are the obvious changes, obvious visual observable changes. And also, from the ages of like 40, 49, 56, you start to get older. There are also obvious physiological and visual changes, physical changes that we can see, right? But what causes, and that's going to cause this cycle. That's a major part of the cycle, as I explained. But another part of the cycle is what's the impetus? What is the causation of the mental cycles? And that is the cycle. Causation of the mental cycles is this 7-year cycle of being in a logical state, logical rational state, and an emotional state. When you see these dips, those dips, those times in your life where maybe it's a little more confusing, it's not solid, and you're not as sharp as you may have been. That's because you're then in the cycle of the emotional state. People tend to negate emotions, but actually your emotions are your very first impulse of thought. Their very first impulse of thought, and then every thought you have is an emotion at first, and then it evolves into a rational thought, which in itself is a miniature cycle of this, right? That's a macrocosm of this. And this is a cycle between when your mind goes in rational, logical states and then back to a rather dominantly emotional state. And then for 7 years, it does that. At the beginning of the 7 years, it's at a very emotional state. Like from year 0, that's when the child doesn't know anything about logic. It is all emotions. It is all emotions and instinct, right? So a child is naturally at that point that it naturally emotional. But then by that time that child reaches 4 years old, they have developed the new sense of logic and rationale. And that is what causes all these rises in awareness and physiological awareness and mental awareness, because your mind goes in is part of that 7-year cycle is the cycle between emotions and logic. So midway from 0 to 4, you're gathering a logical foundation, a logical understanding, logical growth. And then at some point in that age, tied to your physiological development and changes, you become into a more emotional state around about the time of 7. And it's very much tied to hormones. It's very much tied to that's a cycle within biology and human biology, and it's a cycle within nature that you're going to go through that. So all of these cycles don't really get talked about much, because I don't think they're a little bit more abstract. And in society, we always are focused on the, I guess, lowest common denominators of things. So we also look at the tend to focus on the lowest common denominators in reality as well. But on a much higher scale, much more abstract scale, that's where these patterns and these cycles lie. our understanding these cycles must be at a you must be at a higher, you must consider them a higher, with a higher cognition, in order to really grasp and to witness them and recognize them within you. Otherwise, it's very difficult to do so, and life will always seem that it's in an emotional state, right? So even that, what I just said, that the sentiments that I just spoke about being at a emotional state and a rational state, and you must be in a higher cognitive state to understand the principles of this theory. That too is also part of the physiological mechanism, which I explained in the video. So it's all tied together, and there are patterns on top of patterns, and there are systems and cycles within cycles, almost like a fractal, right? The deeper you go, the more abstract they will become, and the more you can see that, wow, reality goes deeper than what it seems to be. So I hope that was very useful. Now I want you to think, do me a favor, prove it to yourself. Look back on these increments of time in your life, from 0 to 7. Of course, from 0 to 7, from 7 to 14, from 14 to 21, there's obvious changes. You can see those. They're on display for the world to see. And you know what those changes are. As you were going through them, you start to change very rapidly. But I mean, if you're older than 21, or in your 30s or 40s or whatever, think back and see, although your body reached full adulthood when you were 21, 18 to 21, do you see any reoccurring patterns in your life over that period of time? When were at your sharpest? When did it seem like everything was working out perfectly? Man, everything is clicking like 9,000. Man, this stuff is sharp. What period? How old were you when those things were happening? When you were Johnny on the spot with ideas, you were rolling. What age were you when things just were not working right? You felt, what am I supposed to? I feel strange. I'm indecisive. I don't really know what to do. Right? And you might discover that your timeline, I believe you will discover that your timeline of events and ups and downs correlate with mine, because these are universal. So I just wanted to share that with you. And I hope that you subscribe to my channel, because I have a whole lot more of information like this that I'd like to share with you. Because, like I said, I'm on the incline. I'm on this incline, and I want to ride it until the age of 60 and beyond, knowing that at the age of 60, I'll be at the peak of this cycle. So I'm going to keep producing videos. I'm going to keep producing other aspects of my life. I'm going to grow a business. I'm going to do a lot of things, because I know this is the best time within this 7-year cycle for me to do this. This is when I should be doing it. This is the time. So thank you. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate you listening to my video and watching my video. Please subscribe. I want to grow my channel. And thank you, and have a great day.